This happened during the summer of 2011. My family had been planning a camping trip for weeks. It wasn't just my parents and siblings. Nearly all of my relatives came along, my uncles, aunts, cousins. The plan sounded simple. We would spend 2 nights camping beside a river deep in the forest. Everyone was excited. Well, almost everyone. My grandmother hated the idea. She grew up believing that certain places in nature should be left alone, especially rivers hidden deep inside forests. Ever since I was little, she'd tell us stories about people who wandered into the woods, heard voices calling their names, or came home acting differently. None of us believed those stories. We thought they were just old legends meant to scare children. Even when she told everyone to go some other place, nobody listened. Looking back, I wish we had listened. We left home before sunrise. By the time we reached the trailhead, it was already around noon. The hike itself wasn't difficult, maybe an hour and a half at most. Since there were so many of us, we divided all the camping supplies between everyone. Some carried tents, others carried food, while the older cousins hauled coolers. When we finally reached the campsite, I understood why everyone had picked it. A wide river flowed through the middle of the forest. The water was crystal clear. The sound of the current echoed through the trees. It was hot enough that jumping into the river sounded better than anything else. The adults immediately started setting up camp. Some worked on the tents. Others prepared dinner. Most of the younger kids ran straight into the water, laughing and splashing each other. For a while, everything felt completely normal. If anything was wrong, none of us noticed it yet. Later that afternoon, it was my turn to help gather firewood. A few of my cousins came with me. We spread out, each looking for dry branches that would burn easily. At first, I could still hear everyone talking. Someone laughed behind me. I heard branches snapping, people calling to each other. Without realizing it, I kept walking farther into the trees. I spotted a large fallen branch that looked perfect for the campfire. When I bent down to lift it, it was much heavier than I expected. I remember laughing to myself and calling out for one of my cousins to come help. No one answered. I called again. Still nothing. I stood up and looked around. That's when I realized I couldn't see anyone. The laughter was gone. The voices were gone. Even the sound of the river seemed distant. The entire forest had become unnaturally quiet. I spent years trying to explain that feeling. It wasn't just fear. It was the overwhelming certainty that I wasn't alone anymore. Every hair on my arm stood up. I slowly turned in a circle. Nothing, just endless trees. Then, I had the strongest feeling that something was standing behind me. I spun around immediately. There was nobody there. But the feeling didn't leave. It only got stronger. It honestly felt like someone was staring at me from somewhere between the trees, watching me, waiting for me to notice. I dropped the branch without thinking. Then I started walking back. After only a few steps, walking turned into running. I don't remember deciding to run. My body just did it. Branches scratched against my arms. Leaves slapped across my face. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over my own footsteps. The strange part. Looking back now, I probably wasn't very far from camp. But while I was running, it felt endless. Like no matter how fast I moved, the forest refused to let me leave. Then, just as suddenly as it had gone silent, I heard voices again. My cousins. People laughing, the river. Within seconds, I stepped back into our campsite. Everyone was acting completely normal. Nobody seemed worried. Nobody even realized I'd been gone. I wanted to tell someone. I almost told my parents. But then the last thing I wanted was to scare them. So I smiled, picked up another piece of firewood, and acted like nothing had happened. Even though I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me back. Before I continue, I just want to say a quick thank you for being here. I'm sorry for interrupting the story, but this channel is still brand new, and your support truly means a lot. That evening, everyone gathered around the campfire while dinner cooked over the flames. Normally, I was one of the loudest people in the family. I joked with my cousins. I teased my younger siblings. But that night, I barely spoke. I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened in the woods. No matter how hard I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, I still felt like something had been watching me. About an hour later, I noticed something else. My body felt strangely hot. At first, I thought it was because we'd been hiking all day. But as the evening went on, it got worse. My head started pounding. My entire body ached. When my mom touched my forehead, she frowned. "You have a fever." I hadn't been sick that morning. Nobody else felt sick, just me. I forced myself to eat a few bites before telling everyone I was going to bed early. The adults weren't worried. They assumed I was just exhausted from the hike. I climbed into the tent I was supposed to share with one of my cousins. The sound of the river echoed outside. Eventually, I fell asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. The campfire had burned low. The forest was completely dark. Then I felt it. Someone was lying beside me. I could feel the weight pressing into the sleeping bag next to mine. I didn't panic. I figured my cousin had finally come to bed. Without opening my eyes, I reached my hand over. Nothing. The sleeping bag beside me was empty. I froze. I slowly opened my eyes. The tent was almost completely dark. I couldn't make out much, but I knew one thing. I was alone. After a few minutes, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. I eventually fell back asleep. The next morning, I found my cousin helping everyone prepare breakfast. I laughed and asked her why she'd come into the tent so late. She looked confused. I never slept in there. I thought she was joking. She wasn't. She told me she'd slept with her sisters the entire night. Something about the way she answered made my stomach drop. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want everyone thinking I was losing my mind. Instead, I kept pretending everything was fine. That day was supposed to be the fun part of the trip. Everyone spent hours swimming in the river. Normally, I loved swimming, and for a while, being in the water actually helped me forget what had happened. But every time I looked toward the trees, that same feeling returned, like something was still there, watching us, waiting. My parents noticed I wasn't acting like myself. They asked if I was feeling better. I smiled, said I was just tired. The truth was, I couldn't explain what I was feeling. That evening, my fever came back even stronger. My head hurt so badly that even the sound of people talking bothered me. Despite the warm summer air, I couldn't stop shivering. It didn't make any sense. Everyone else was comfortable. I was freezing. Once again, I went to bed before everyone else. The last thing I remember was hearing my family laughing around the campfire. Then everything went black. The next thing I knew, someone was violently shaking my shoulders. I opened my eyes. My aunt was standing over me. She looked terrified. I wasn't in my sleeping bag anymore. I was standing outside, only a few steps away from the river. My feet were wet. I stared at the water in complete confusion. I didn't remember leaving the tent. I didn't remember walking outside. My aunt asked me why I was standing there by myself. I had no answer. Everyone assumed I'd been sleepwalking. That explanation made sense. At least, it should have. My uncle said one of my cousins should sleep in the tent with me that night just in case it happened again. I told him I'd be fine. I didn't want everyone worrying about me. Eventually, I went back to sleep. Sometime during the night, I woke up again. This time I didn't move. I could clearly feel someone lying beside me. The weight was there. The warmth was there. The sound of slow breathing was there. I smiled to myself. I figured my uncle had asked one of my cousins to stay with me. Feeling safer, I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, everyone packed up camp. I couldn't wait to leave. The entire drive home, my headache refused to go away. Before we left, I asked my cousins which one had slept beside me. They all looked confused. None of them had. Then I asked my uncle. He frowned. He admitted he didn't send anyone. Nobody had entered my tent that night. I didn't know what to think anymore. By the time we got home, I looked terrible. Before I even had a chance to put my backpack down, my grandmother walked over to me. She stared into my face for several seconds. Then she quietly asked, "What happened to you?" I tried to laugh it off. She didn't smile. I finally told her everything. Getting lost in the woods. Feeling watched. The fever, waking up near the river. Feeling someone sleeping beside me. She didn't interrupt me once. When I finished, she immediately grabbed her prayer beads. She told me to sit beside her. She began praying. Then she asked me to pray with her. The strange part, I suddenly didn't want to. I can't explain why. I've always been a religious person. But in that moment, something inside me wanted to leave the room. It felt almost impossible to concentrate. My grandmother noticed. She simply held my hand tighter and continued praying. I forced myself to pray with her. When she finally finished, she told me to go get some rest. I slept for several hours. When I woke up, the headache was gone. The fever was gone. For the first time since getting lost in those woods, I didn't feel like someone was watching me anymore. My appetite had completely returned. I felt normal again. My family still believes I scared myself after getting separated in the forest. Maybe they're right. Maybe everything has a logical explanation. I haven't gone camping since, and I don't think I ever will. This happened a few years ago during a family camping trip. We'd gone to a provincial park in the middle of the week because it was always quieter. Most families waited until the weekend, so by Tuesday night there were only a handful of occupied campsites. I actually liked it that way. The campground felt peaceful, at least during the day. Our trailer was on a corner site, tucked against a stretch of trees. Behind it was a narrow dirt path that cut through the woods and led straight to the comfort station. It only saved about a minute compared to walking around the road, but when you're half asleep at 2 a.m, every minute feels worth saving. That shortcut would end up being the biggest mistake I made that trip. Around 2 a.m, I woke up needing to use the bathroom. The campground was silent. No kids laughing, no campfires burning. Just the distant hum of insects and the occasional breeze moving through the trees. I grabbed a flashlight but barely used it. The moon was bright enough to see the trail. I'd walked that shortcut dozens of times before. I wasn't nervous, not even a little. About halfway through the path, I heard it. A quiet giggle. It wasn't loud. It sounded like someone standing just a few feet away, trying not to laugh. I stopped walking. The sound had been so close that I instinctively turned toward it. Nothing. I slowly swept my flashlight across the trees. No eyes reflecting back. No raccoon. No porcupine. Not even the sound of leaves moving. That was the first thing that bothered me. If it had been an animal, I should have heard it running away. Instead, the forest was completely still. I told myself it had to be wildlife. Animals make strange noises all the time. I even laughed at myself for getting startled. Then I kept walking. I'd only taken a few more steps when I caught myself thinking, what if that wasn't an animal? The thought had barely crossed my mind when a woman's voice came from somewhere deeper in the woods. Clear enough that I can still hear it today. Hello? Not loud, not aggressive, just hello. Like someone had noticed me. Every muscle in my body locked up. I didn't answer. I didn't even look toward the voice. I turned around and ran. I sprinted toward the lights as fast as I could. About halfway there, I caught my foot on a fallen log. I hit the ground hard. My pant leg ripped open, and I scraped my shin badly enough that it started bleeding almost immediately. I didn't care. I got back up and kept running until I reached the brightly lit comfort station. Once I was inside, I finally caught my breath. My hands were shaking. After a few minutes, embarrassment started replacing fear. I kept telling myself there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe I'd misheard a raccoon. Maybe another camper had wandered into the woods. Maybe someone had been playing a prank. The more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed to believe anything else. Eventually, I finished what I'd come there to do. When I stepped back outside, I'd completely talked myself down. There was one thing I did decide, though. Even if it had been another person, I wasn't interested in meeting them at 2 a.m. So instead of taking the shortcut back, I chose the longer route along the campground road. The road was open. There were lights every few hundred feet. It felt much safer. As I got close to the entrance of that little trail, I stayed as far away from it as I could. I remember glancing toward the opening for just a second. The woods looked completely empty. Then, I heard it again. This time it wasn't deep in the forest. It sounded almost like it was right beside the trail entrance. A whisper. Soft. Calm. Almost inviting. Come back. I froze. For 1 second, I actually questioned whether I'd imagined it. Then every instinct I had screamed at me to leave. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life. I didn't look behind me once. I didn't stop until I reached our trailer, locked the door, and climbed back into bed. I barely slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, I walked the same trail in broad daylight. It looked completely ordinary. No footprints. No signs that anyone had been there. Nothing. To this day, I still don't know what I heard. Maybe there really was another camper wandering through the woods. Maybe exhaustion made me hear things that weren't there. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that I've never used a campground shortcut at night again. Luckily, my family bought a trailer with its own bathroom the following year. My relatives still laugh whenever I refuse to walk through the woods after dark. I usually laugh with them. But every once in a while, I'll remember that quiet giggle. I'd planned a simple overnight hike in a national forest in western Montana. Nothing extreme. About 7 miles in, camp for the night, hike back the next morning. I'd done longer trips dozens of times. The weather forecast was clear. I left my route, packed extra food, a first aid kit, and my satellite communicator. By noon, I was already on the trail. The hike was beautiful, golden aspens, cold air, just enough wind to keep the mosquitoes away. I passed one older couple near the trailhead, and after that I didn't see another person. Exactly how I liked it. Around 4 in the afternoon, I found a small clearing beside a creek. Flat ground, soft dirt, a fallen log that made a perfect place to cook dinner. It wasn't an official campsite, but nothing about it felt unusual. I set up my tent, made coffee, and watched the sun disappear behind the trees. For the first few hours, everything was perfect. I wrote in my small notebook I carry on every trip. Just simple notes, weather, mileage, anything unusual. I wrote, camped beside creek, quiet, probably the best spot I've found all year. I closed the notebook and slipped it into my backpack. That night I slept surprisingly well. No strange noises, no footsteps, no animals. I woke just after sunrise feeling more rested than I had in weeks. I climbed out of the tent, stretched, and started boiling water for coffee. That's when I noticed my boots. I'd left them beside the entrance of the tent. Now they were sitting neatly beside the fire ring, perfectly side by side. I frowned. I was camping alone. Maybe I'd moved them before bed. I couldn't remember. Again, not impossible. Just odd. I finished breakfast and decided to hike up to a rocky overlook about a mile away. The trail wasn't difficult, just a steady climb through thick pine trees. About 30 minutes later, I reached the overlook. The view was incredible. Mountains stretched for miles. The creek below looked like a silver ribbon winding through the valley. I stayed maybe 10 minutes, then turned around. Except, when I reached the bottom of the hill, my tent was gone. The fire ring was gone. The clearing wasn't there. I checked my GPS. According to the map, I was exactly where I'd camped. I slowly turned in a circle. Nothing looked familiar. Not one tree, not one rock. Just endless forest. I blamed myself. I'd obviously taken a wrong turn, so I walked back uphill, found the overlook again, double-checked the trail, then followed it down a second time. This time, the clearing was there, exactly where it should have been. Tent, fire ring, backpack. Everything. I stood there for nearly a minute trying to convince myself I'd simply wandered off the trail the first time. It was the only explanation that made sense, even if I couldn't remember leaving it. As I packed my gear, I noticed something sticking out from beneath my backpack. My notebook. I was certain it had been zipped inside. I picked it up. For the first time since arriving, I thought about my father's rule. If the woods ever start feeling unfamiliar, leave. Everything felt normal. But somehow, it also felt like I'd been there before. Not yesterday, not last year, much longer than that. And I couldn't explain why. Zipped the notebook into the deepest pocket of my backpack and told myself I was overreacting. People forget things. I'd been hiking since noon. I'd slept in unfamiliar surroundings. There had to be a reasonable explanation. Still, I packed faster than I'd planned. Within 20 minutes, I was back on the trail. The parking lot was only 7 miles away. If I kept a steady pace, I'd be home before dark. Or at least, that was the plan. About an hour into the hike, I came across a fallen pine tree stretched across the trail. I didn't remember climbing over it the day before. It looked old enough that I should have noticed. I stepped over the trunk and kept walking. 10 minutes later, I stopped. The same fallen tree was lying across the trail. Same broken branch. Same split in the bark. I looked behind me. The trail stretched away exactly as I'd left it. There wasn't another path. No switchback, no fork. Nothing. I stood there for nearly a minute before convincing myself there had to be two similar trees. Forests are full of repeating landmarks. That's all this was. I climbed over it again. This time, I pulled my pocket knife from my bag and carved a small X into the trunk. Nothing fancy, just enough to recognize it. 15 minutes later, the trail ended at the same tree. The X was still there. Only, it wasn't fresh anymore. Tiny strands of moss had begun creeping through it. It looked as though I'd carved it days ago. I didn't touch it. I turned around and walked as fast as I could. My father's voice echoed in my head. If the woods ever start feeling unfamiliar, leave. I finally understood what he'd meant. It wasn't about recognizing a place. It was about a place recognizing you. The thought made no sense. I hated myself for even thinking it. But I couldn't shake it. The forest wasn't changing. My certainty was. Every mile I became less confident in what I'd actually seen. By late afternoon, I reached the creek again. The same creek. The same clearing where my tent had been. I didn't walk into the clearing. I just stood there, frozen. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. There was smoke rising from the fire ring. Not flames. Just the thin trail of smoke that comes from warm ashes. Someone had been sitting there recently. Slowly I backed away without taking my eyes off the campsite. The sun was dropping behind the trees. For the first time all day, panic began replacing confusion. I wasn't thinking clearly anymore. I was second-guessing every turn, every memory, every decision. Then, I heard a whistle. 3 short notes. A pause. 1 long note. The exact whistle my father used to do whenever he wanted me to come back to camp. I hadn't heard it since I was 17. My chest tightened. For 1 impossible second, I stayed silent. The whistle came again. Then, nothing. I waited 5 minutes, 10. The forest remained completely still. I kept walking. Just before sunset, the trees opened. I could see gravel, my truck. I unlocked the driver's door, threw my backpack into the passenger seat, and climbed inside. The dashboard clock read 6:42 p.m., exactly what I'd expected. Everything felt normal again. I started the engine and drove away without looking back. For the first 20 miles, I kept telling myself the same thing. Stress. Fatigue. That's all it was. The human brain plays tricks when you're isolated. I believed that until I got home. The next morning, I unpacked my backpack. Most of my gear was exactly where I'd left it, except for the notebook. It wasn't in the main compartment. It wasn't in the side pocket. I finally found it inside my sleeping bag, a place I'd never put it. I opened it. Every page I'd written over the weekend was gone. I stared at it for a long time. Then I closed the notebook. I never showed it to anyone. If you're enjoying these stories, please consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment below. I'd also love to hear any suggestions you have to help make this channel even better. Thank you so much for your support.